Let's move on to topic two. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's GCC tour. Gentlemen, for a region with virtually no snow, there seems to be a lot of thawing going on in the region.
Well played. Can we get a golf clap?
Thank you. When I wrote that, I was like, man,
It's cold.
MBS, after a very busy weekend last weekend, welcoming President Macron of France and hosting the first ever F1 in Saudi Arabia, hit the road for a regional tour of GCC nations. The tour began in Oman, where photos showed the Crown Prince and his entourage meeting with Haitham bin Tariq at Al Alam Palace in Muscat. Really cool photos on SPA, the official government site. Check them out. MBS then arrived in Dubai on Tuesday. Went to Expo 2020 and also visited Abu Dhabi. Both Saudi and UAE publications yesterday lauded the Crown Prince's arrival there, but the two are increasingly in competition to win the mantle of, quote, most attractive investment destination in the region, as we just discussed. On Wednesday, the Crown Prince visited Qatar, his first trip there since the diplomatic standoff between the two nations, which lasted several years. I'm going to stop there. There's a lot to unpack here. Robert, let's start with you. Why the thaw in relations now, and what does this trip mean from Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman?
Well, I think the thaw really started to take place earlier this year as the Gulf region transitioned out of a very difficult 2020 that I would categorize as an inward-looking year. All of the countries in the region and their governments, they were looking inward, addressing urgent domestic challenges, mostly on the economic front. And as 2020 wrapped up and 2021 started, we began to see probably the product of a slightly more outward-looking approach to the region. Trying to encourage these fragile economic recoveries requires a stable region. It requires trading partners. It requires a reduction of tensions that will allow foreign investors and traders and business people to feel comfortable, to not be constantly worried about political risk. And that's very much how I understood the framework of kind of easing regional tensions, increasing regional cooperation. That framework of really coming into being early in 2021. We saw the reconciliation in January with Qatar coming more squarely into the fold of the GCC, and more or less business operations across the region returning to a more familiar mode of operating. And my general sense in speaking with others is that everyone was able to breathe a sigh of relief there. That was a good thing. There was this sense that tensions had, in some cases, spiraled out of control. And all of the parties had reached a point of diminishing returns, at least on an economic level. And what else was there to gain from continuing a boycott, from having these rising tensions with neighboring states? So now I see it as all of the actors in the region are moving in the other direction to say we had everything to lose by continuing this strategy. We have everything to gain from moving in the other direction. More dialogues, more economic cooperation, more business deals. I think this Mohammed bin Salman trip around the GCC in particular, although it takes place in this broad framework that I laid out, I think it's probably most closely related to the Iran issue and the ongoing talks in Vienna, the ongoing Saudi-Iran talks, UAE visit to Iran. I mean, the continued work to develop a Gulf security architecture with Saudi Arabia at the front and center of that, building that architecture. And I really believe that MBS thinks now's the right time to be more visible, to create this, to encourage this cooperation, and try to present a united front at the upcoming GCC summit.
Diplomacy has broken out in the region, and it's very nice to see. I think, Robert, that's spot on. I think that Al-Ula conference in January unlocked the intra-GCC shackles that had been in place since 2017 and gave them an opportunity to communicate on a more normalized basis. I think a lot of this actually goes back to September 2019, I think, for the Saudis. And what happened, as we recall, is when the Abqaiq and Khurais facilities were hit by drones and missiles, which the EU and the states, the U.S., agreed were Iranian sourced, and nothing happened. I think that was stunning to the Saudis. And there's talk, I think, that with the manner of the withdrawal from Afghanistan prompted the Gulf to reconsider its security relationships and wonder about U.S. resolve and this sort of thing. It began, I think, more in September 2019 when they were shocked that nothing happened. And this was after I'm not going to say go along with, because the Trump foreign policy it was sort of a diplomacy-free foreign policy in the sense that it was policy, very personalized policy. And they would agree, and I think President Trump was right in that the JCPO did not address the really destabilizing issues of Iranian missile capacity and support for non-state actors. But ultimately, in terms of the very serious sanctions regime, it wasn't effective. Iran, has greatly enhanced its uranium enrichment, its nuclear expertise, its advanced its ballistic missile capabilities, and despite the sanctions, which in part were intended to squeeze and starve the financial support for these non-state actors, those entities continue unabated. And at the end of the day, and I think in terms of certain people within the U.S. administration, and certainly, the Iranian regime not only didn't fall, it became more hardline. So underlying all this, I agree with you, Robert, is that there's a coming out of the pandemic, there's a greater, the Alula unlocked things, and they can talk about these issues, but they really have to figure out their regional security situation in light of a potential changed U.S. posture on the region. So I personally think that Mohammed bin Salman has got to appreciate this opportunity to engage at this level of leadership. And I know he sees himself as a leader. He hasn't made a trip overseas, I think, since Egypt in 2019. So this is an opportunity to show leadership within the region. And they're going to talk about trade and that sort of thing. But I think, as you note, really the big point is how are we going to secure ourselves in light of the changing global situation, especially vis-a-vis Iran.
At risk of mentioning one big thing out of turn, I would say that the burgeoning Saudi-Oman relationship is one space that I'm watching pretty closely. And as you said, Richard, after this visit, we saw yet again new announcements about trade and investment deals between the two countries. And I remember back in 2019, my last trip to Muscat. I spoke with a number of Omanis who were who understood that the Sultan Qaboos was not in great health, that his days were unfortunately numbered. But at the time they were saying, what's going on in Saudi Arabia, we don't agree with everything, but on the economic front, what's happening there is what we need in our country, that they are taking the bold necessary steps, whether it's on taxation or transforming, trying to transform government processes that we really desperately need to do in Oman. And I believe that a lot of Omanis saw in this new Sultan Haytham the ability for him as a new sultan to undertake some of those sensitive reforms that were long, long overdue. And part of that, I'm not surprised to see this warming of relations between the two countries. And especially from Oman's point of view, looking at changing Saudi Arabia as a big market and as a really important regional partner to make sure that they have on their side and can use to achieve some very real and urgent economic interests.
And it was interesting. His first trip, Sultan Haytham, his first trip was to Saudi once he became head of state. And I understand that Saudi Arabia and Iran have had discussions maybe back in January. I guess 6 meetings under the auspices of Iraq. That's going to be moving to Oman. Oman can certainly help them in Yemen. Yes, I agree. That's a very promising growth opportunity for both countries.
And of course, Robert, you saw today that the road between Saudi Arabia and Oman opened up, saving 16 hours of drive time between the two nations, which is like DC to Florida. So that's.
I didn't hear that it was officially open, but I heard
officially opened it.
Officially opened
Yes.
today. So great. Yeah. Well, we can all get together and do a road trip.
So actually, that
That'd
would
be
be
fun.
fascinating. I will say this, because we had pictures of it up in our daily news review, Saudi U.S. Trade Group daily news review, and those pictures of it. And I'm wondering, there's got to be some sort of regular. It's like snow in North Dakota. Somebody has to come along and blow off the sand, because it's going to get sand. It's a 2-lane road, 765 kilometer 2-lane road through desert, and it's amazing. But somebody's going to have to keep that thing clear.
They need a mega brush.
a big blower.
They'll have the equivalent of the Bambonis on an ice rink, just
Exactly.
going down the road, dusting it off.
Sand bonies.
Sand bonies.
Sorry,
We may have a new episode
that's
title.
pure gold.